This is where we can. So recording, okay, good. All right, so we'll go ahead and start. This first day is our absentee department and our election information services department. This is where we make all the voter lists. All the absentee ballots are handled in this area with the mailing of ballots out to voters. We get the applications in, and mail the ballots out. All the military and overseas ballots are handled here. It's a four-person department, and 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats.
And just to add to what Rick was saying, the bipartisanship is not by choice necessarily, it is the law in Missouri. So we have 116 county level election authorities. 6 of them are election boards. So there's a 4-member board, 2 Ds, 2 Rs, as Rick mentioned, appointed by the governor. And then that 4-member board, which Peggy used to be on, and so glad to see her tonight. They hire the directors, and then the directors are kind of like, I don't know, for an analogy, like the school superintendent, we run the day-to-day operation. So the other 110 counties in Missouri have an elected county clerk that runs the elections, in addition to all the other stuff county clerks do, like liquor licenses and shoveling manure or whatever else.
Property tax.
Yeah, yeah.
We are we're governed by state law, section 115 of the revised Missouri statutes. The counties are required to pay our salaries and provide state leave. We moved up here in April of 2017. We were down in Southern Industrial Court down in Maplewood for a number of years. I started just 3 months before we moved up here, so I'm the most junior of the directors of the pool directors. Christian's been here forever. Years over there, and Rick's been director for 7 years.
So Rick's come along pretty good. He's learning.
You can't teach an old dog some. Anyway, any questions?
Just gonna say, feel free to ask questions as we go through this. Rick and I mean, informal, so ask questions. Delicate balancing act. There's always more of the 2 major ones than the other ones. Probably the modern sensibilities, it sounds a little bit draconian, but it is the law.
And it says the 2 major parties in the law, which now are Republican and Democrats. That changes. And, you know,
We're working on it.
Okay. That's good. So this is the mapping and polling place department here. All these 3 guys make up all the maps that are provided to candidates and other folks. They also did redistricting, after the lines were drawn, they had to then take those lines and move people, not move them, but change their precincts and townships that they were in. So it was a massive effort on their part to get all that done. They're GIS experts, the three of them, and it made it very simple to do that.
Absolutely. And if you haven't been on our website, these guys have built a number of apps. We have a redistricting hub on our website where you can see all the changes to the state rep, state senate, county council, now congressional finally. We had about 13 or 14 cities that redrew their wards prior to the April election. We'll have a few more prior to next April's election. These guys also coordinate all the polling places. So about that, because that there just is a place to go vote on election day. It is not an easy task finding now the 230, 40, 50 some odd polling places we use in St. Louis County. Under Missouri law, public buildings, tax supported buildings like schools, libraries, city halls, they can't tell us no, but the churches and the VFW halls and the bowling alleys we use, they can tell us no. And especially in 2020, a lot of them are telling us no. So that's why.
All of them told us no.
Yeah, pretty much all of them told us no.
Because of COVID?
COVID.
Because of COVID, yeah, so.
We only had one church that let us in. That was my church.
Yeah. It's only because we have the connection, exactly right. So it's always, and then, before each election, we have to contact all those locations, and sometimes they've got construction, sometimes if it's a private building like a church, they say, no, we've got XYZ thing going on and we have to find something else. So it's tough, but now that we allow people to vote anywhere, if you don't like the one that's, close to you, can go the other one down the street if it's better or easier for you to access, whatever the case may be.
Is there compensation to the private entities that will open?
It's yeah.
Payroll.
Slightly less than we paid forward.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. There are some schools and other public buildings that aren't too excited for us to stay there, but we try to work together, and Rick and I try to sweet talk a little bit every once in a while and make it work out.
Very seldom we have to pull out the hammer of the state law.
Yeah.
Seldom.
All right, we move on down this way. So this area in the middle is where our election judge coordinators sit. So election judges, election day workers. And like I mentioned, they have to be polling places staffed in equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats. As it's important because if we can't get enough people, then election day, can't happen. We also have some folks that sit over there that do our training. So before every election, our election judges receive training. During COVID, we transitioned to virtual training. So we're back to kind of a hybrid system where, especially for new people, they need to come in and have hands-on training. But we do a hybrid version, especially for folks who have done it before. They have a virtual option. I don't know, anything else you want to add to that? I would say a lot of people don't realize the biggest cost of any election is the election judges. So just the payroll for the election judges, I think in April is maybe $650,000 just to pay the poll workers.
Do they have to be associated with the precinct or the area that they're in? So if there's, Democrats in the county that are willing to drive out to wherever,
Yep.
We'll take them.
We'll take them. And we'll usually monetarily incentivize them if they're willing to do it. It's a long day and you gotta be there at 5 a.m. So if you're talking about somebody who lives in Florissant, and you say, we need you in Wildwood, and you need to be there at 5, that's kind of a tough sell sometimes. So
It really is, sorry.
yes.
Now that you can both any place in the county, does that impact the number of locations you need, or can you like shrink it down a little bit? Those are long days.
Yeah.
And so we actually have reduced the number.
Yeah, when I got here 5 years ago, we had over 400 polling places. Now, we didn't have vote anywhere that time. We had different equipment. So with our new equipment and the improvements we've made with electronic poll books, we've been able to do the vote anywhere. So we have reduced it from over 400 down to about 220,
Okay.
30. So we could go even lower if we have to. I mean, we talked about it certainly during the pandemic. We had a lot of trouble getting poll workers in 2020 because everybody was afraid with good reason. So, but we were able to have at least 200 plus polling places for the presidential. We were below that for the April election, which moved to June, and then for the August primary election, we had less than 200 polling places. But that was driven by the number of poll workers we could get for those elections.
And what made a huge difference in 2020, so many more people voted absentee, which took a lot of pressure off of election day. We had over 40% of the voters vote prior to the election day, whether by mail or in person absentee. It won't be that high again this year. We know that already from the April election. But it does take pressure off election day. The more people that vote prior to election day. So we're going to have, as a result, we're going to have more polling places this year than we did in 2020.
Already for April, I think they had 180 in April of 2020. Sorry, August of 2020. 224.
Yep.
41. Any other questions?
All right, we'll move on down. We got one more spot out here, and then we'll back. And the curtain right. So from where I am all the way back to the wall, this is the area where we do all of our voter registration, voter list maintenance, and petition processing. And right now, our petition processing is a big part of what we're doing. If you come here during the day, people are sitting at all these desks and they're verifying the signatures on the petitions that were submitted to the Secretary of State's office. And there are only 2 this year, the one about marijuana and one about election reform and ranked choice voting. So if those both end up having enough signatures, they'll go on the November ballot. But we have to verify every single signature. And so in our case, that's hundreds of thousands of signatures. So it's people sitting here on the computer, bringing up the image of the petition, looking up that voter, finding the image of their signature that's on file, matching it against what they signed with, and either accepting or rejecting it. So it is a very labor-intensive process.
And the voter registration process is what their main function is. And on any given day, they'll do 100 to 200 voter registration changes. People change their address, they move in the county, move out of the county, people die, people go to prison. So there's lots of changes. In a presidential year, that's about 1,000. It's quite a bit of work, and it has to be perfectly accurate. Otherwise, people may not be able to vote on elections. It's very, as Eric said, a labor-intensive effort, but it has to be extremely accurate.
And I like to call it voter list maintenance, more so than voter registration, because new voter registrants are a minority of the things that they process back here. It's like Rick said, the address changes, the name changes for when people get married, so on. And then it's also, like Rick said, when people are dying and going to prison and moving out of state. Missouri joined a few years ago an interstate consortium of about, now it's 30 other states, where we share the voter registration list with about 30 other states. So when somebody pops up in another state, then we can maintain the list accordingly. So the voter list is not stagnant. It changes every minute of every day that we're here. Constantly updating. But it is the case. You know, we're always on the back end, because the last thing people do, if they do it at all, is tell the election board that they can do something that's been updated in their life. The last thing obituaries in the newspaper. So if they can match people up from obituaries, we can maintain the list that way too. We use all the tools available to us, but it's I would say it's still a very 20th century institution, the way we do voter registration in the United States. Yes.
Are the registration lists public?
Yep. Yeah, any member of the public can request the list of registered voters for a nominal fee and check it out if they want. We have had several people, especially after 2020, they want to see the list. So yeah, of course, and it not only gives the name of the voter, where they're registered, but it also has the registration history and the elections that they voted. So who you voted for is not a public record. We have no way of knowing that, but whether or not you voted is. That's a great. We usually thanks, Peggy. We usually show that when we go through the mapping department, but everybody's gone through. Different lines from all the different districts that overlay each other. And so we have, well, after districting, we're now under 1,000 precincts, which is very nice. But prior to redistricting, we have over 1,200 precincts. So we have essentially 1,200 different ballots, different versions of ballots on election day. And we have to make sure the voter receives the correct ballot. And if we don't have people registered in the right place, if we don't have the precincts drawn correctly, if things like that, then people are going to get the wrong ballot. And that is a particular challenge in St. Louis County with our plethora of political subdivisions that we have.
I think in any given April election, where we have all the municipalities and the school districts, and fire districts, and all those other districts, library districts, we may have up to 330 different ballot styles. And in the old days, where you had to vote at your assigned location, some polling places might have up to 9 different ballots.
Whether that turnaround would be sufficient. I think you sort of hinted at it, but I'm curious, like, what that meant. Even like the college statewide, you might have is there a time crunch? Is there like consternation and like stress? And what are you seeing in the day to day?
Election authorities, you see that, especially a county like St. Charles, which had a lot of changes too, just like our own county. We have GIS trained mapping people, and they were able to knock it out in about 3.5 hours on Saturday. Everybody in the right congressional district, right precincts. So a lot of it hinges on this GIS capability. I think St. Charles doesn't have the capability that we have, so it's taking them a longer time. They're really their election director said they're having to work literally 24/7.
Can you share resources in terms of like that GI, what GIS stands for what?
Geographic information system.
Oh, okay.
And in our case, it has a lot to do with St. Louis County also has a GIS function within county government that overlays with the assessor and things, so all the parcels. And that helps us a lot with identifying, once we draw a line where people belong. So we can, like Rick said, or intimated at least, we've automated a lot of that. So the biggest part for us is not so much the physical moving of the lines, it's checking to make sure, once we move the lines, everybody's in the right place. And then probably the long pole in the tent is the statewide voter database called MCVR, Missouri Centralized Voter Registration. It's an antiquated database, frankly. It was developed in 2004, and it doesn't have a GIS function resident in it. So we do all of our stuff in the GIS, like Rick explained, but then we have to go into MCVR and then manually move the different address ranges into the right district. So, addresses 1 through 99 on Main Street go here, and 100 through 150 go there. And that's a labor-intensive process, but we're lucky, as Rick mentioned. Well, I don't know. Are we lucky, or we have foresight and planning? Yeah.
I refuse to answer that on the basis that it might make me look better than I really am.
Okay. So on that note, unless anybody has other questions, why don't we move back in the back to where we do all of our ballot process.
See my family. Because you're the official person.
I am an official
More official than them.
All right, so what you're looking at here, folks, to your right, my left, is what we call our ballot room. And on the other side is what we call our tabulation room. Start with the ballot room. This is where basically all of the absentee ballot preparation and processing happens. That's where we store all the absentee ballots as they come back from the voters prior to election day. It is where we duplicate damaged ballots, which you probably didn't know there is ballot duplication. It might sound nefarious, but it's not. It's for a good purpose, which we'll show you. And everything else to do with absentee. So anything I missed there, Rick?
This is a second room of 4. Swipe it.
All right. So
Get your cameras ready.
They also have the nuclear codes too.
That's the other room.
I mean, it's a good system.
It just goes uphill. It is in many ways similar to a post office.
2020, every one of these boxes was filled. As we had, as Eric said, in 2020 for the presidential, we had 161,000 people vote by mail, another 60,000 voted in person absentee at our satellite locations in here. So all of those 221,000 ballots came into this room. And it was still good.
Yes.
For the whole county, it was 200 and something votes,
Just
1,000 votes?
absentee.
Only
Oh,
absentee,
absentee.
yeah.
On election day, we had another 320,000 people vote in person on election day.
So
Only 540,000 people vote. That was a percentage record for the county, 79.5%.
So as Rick was mentioning, as the ballots, the mail ballots come in, we get them from the post office or from people who bring them into the office. We bring them in here, and then on these tables, we will set up computers with scanners and in bipartisan teams. Our staff will sit there. They will, every envelope has a barcode on it. They'll scan the barcode, bring up the voter's record, make sure that, you know, they didn't try to apply more than once or whatever the case may be. They will verify that the signature on the ballot envelope matches the signature on file, and then they will batch them together in batches of 100. And starting 5 days before the election, bipartisan teams can begin opening the ballot envelopes and taking the ballots out of the envelopes. And then we'll show you what we do with them after that. So that's what all these racks you see are for, holding these batches either prior to or after their opening and all that kind of stuff. So especially on a November election, because for us, 5 days is really not quite enough for a county of our size. We start at 12:01 a.m. on that 5th day, on that Thursday before the election. We bring the people in here, and we have a machine that has a high-speed slicer on it, and it starts slicing the envelopes open. And we have, for November 2020, we had 40 teams out in our warehouse. We had 40 bipartisan teams, 80 people opening those ballots for the 5 days straight, getting them all ready to go so they can be counted and then tabulated once the polls close on election day. And then that duplication process I mentioned, that's what this island of monitors is for right here. So when a ballot comes back from a voter, once we start opening them, it is not uncommon for somebody to spill coffee on their ballot, for the dog to chew the corner of it off, or especially during COVID, what our favorite one was, people who over sanitize their ballot. We had several microwave ballots that we got back. Yeah. So, and then also the military and overseas voters, they can have their ballot emailed to them. And depending on where they are, they can either email it back or mail it back from the email. All those ballots have to be duplicated because they can't be read by our scanners. So Christian pretty much runs this process, and what he does, the damaged or unreadable ballot, he scans that damaged or unreadable ballot on the scanner. The scanner will print a code on it, say Duke 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the image of that damaged ballot will pop up on one of these screens. And then we have bipartisan teams sitting at each of these screens, and they will duplicate that damaged ballot onto a blank ballot. And so they just use a mouse and they fill in the boxes just like the original ballot was. And then they print off on this printer. And then they can be read through the scanners in the room next door. So for the November 2020 election, we had over 5,000 duplications. So it was a big process. So
I think the important thing to note is, Eric said, when you scan it through, it serializes that damaged ballot, and the new ballot has the same number on it. So you can match it up if there's ever an audit question and say, here was the original one and here's the new one. It's exactly the same ballot, just one is not damaged.
So that's what happens in here in the wee hours of the morning on weekend before the election. Yes.
Do you have to staff up for this? I mean, like, do you hire people and train them specifically for this job?
So for more, I would say sensitive time staff for it, and we work a lot of overtime. It is for the more rote tasks like checking in the voters and organizing the mail or whatever the case may be. That's what we hire a lot of temps for, to take that burden off of our full-time staff. Because this is stuff, you know, we do 3 or 4 elections a year, and it's important to have muscle memory for these kinds of things, because it's, as you can imagine, as you all know now, it's a highly scrutinized process. And if anybody's asking questions after the election, frankly, we want them to ask the questions of us and say, what did you do wrong? And not some temporary person we hired off the street.
So mail, at my work, I have noticed that mail is more and more of a problem. Do you find post-election that you're getting ballots that, were mailed days and days, weeks?
Yeah, I mean, 2020 was a tough year in that regard. A lot of people were obviously mailing in their ballots. And we work with the post office very closely, both here in Bridgeton and also the post office downtown. Couple of things. On night, we will have people, bipartisan teams in both places, to pick up any ballots that they have received prior to 7 p.m. State law says if we don't have the ballot in hand by 7 p.m., we cannot count. So we'll go to those places and pick up the ballots that are laying around. I mean, they came in late in the day and they haven't obviously had time to get them over to our office. They don't have the people or maybe the urgency to get it to us by 7 p.m. They probably even know the law. So we go there to make sure that we can get as many ballots as we can, because we feel if a person has gotten it into the mail system, that went to the post office, got to the post office for delivery to us, that we ought to do everything we can to make sure that that ballot counts. And as a result, just in the time that I've been here, the number of ballots that have not counted, that came in late, like the next day, has dropped precipitously. So it's been a good thing. I think in 2020, for November, we picked up nearly 2,000 ballots at those two locations at 7 p.m. So they were in our hands and we went ahead and counted. Now there are ballots that come in the next day or whatever. I remember a lot will try to ensure that their college age kids, their ballots get in here on time. And they go to great lengths to make sure that they do very expensive lengths. In one case, the guys paid over $400 to have FedEx here, and it got here at 7:20. Did not count. I don't know who was it. You or me that called the guy.
We didn't want to call.
Anyway, I think in 2020, a lot of people were worried about the postal system not working fast enough. So they would bring their ballots in, drop them off here, or drop them off at our satellite locations, or drop them off, surrender them at the polling place on election day, and then they can vote. So a lot of different ways you can take care of your absentee ballot once you get it. And I know a lot of people don't sometimes have the ability to do some of the things I just described, but we definitely try to make sure that if at all possible, they can leave it somewhere. They have to show their identification and prove who they are. You can't drop off somebody else's ballot. It's got to be you or a close relative, like a husband, wife. So we do check all of that, just like if you would brought it to our office.
What do you do with ballots that get to you late? Do you contact people, or do they get shredded? What
We have to keep, first of all, we have to keep all election materials for 22 months. That's a federal law. So everything is kept here. We don't normally contact the people. First of all, we don't have the wherewithal to have phone numbers and stuff like that. But again, the numbers for a county of our size with 750,000 registered voters, we have very, very few ballots coming in.
What we do try to do to go the extra mile for our ballots that we receive prior to the deadline, especially prior to election day, if people forget to sign them, or in many cases in Missouri, you have to have the envelope notarized. If you forget to have it notarized, we will contact that person and say, you forgot to sign this, or you forgot to have it notarized, or both, or whatever. If you want it to count, you need to come here and sign it, or you can go to the polling place and vote a new ballot, and we will not count that original one. So we do, the folks who we have gotten stuff from, we do try to give them a heads up in case there's a problem. But I will say to Rick's point, and that was an excellent point he made about people bring the ballots, and there was so much media attention on the mail ballots and the postal system and everything. A lot of people were afraid to put their ballot through the mail, and they just brought it here. And then they were very careful to fill everything out. It was like the fewest mistakes I ever seen. People were inspecting these things like never before. So it was, in that sense, it was good.
Yeah, we don't mail a ballot out closer than 2 weeks to the election, because we don't think that it would get there and get back in time to count. So, and we'll tell people that too, just to go to the satellite location.
I was gonna ask about the notarizing of the ballots. Are there any exemptions to that?
Yep, Missouri, so there are 6 reasons that you can use or excuses to vote by absentee ballot. If you are voting by absentee ballot because you are disabled or you're caring for somebody who's sick or disabled, you are not required to have it notarized. And then if you are in the military or overseas or whatever, you are not required to have it notarized either. So,
All the other reasons you have to get notarized.
so if you're just lying about being out of town on election day, then you have to have notarized. Which is what most absentee voters are.
Nobody does that.
Are well-intentioned liars.
That's right.
And now the St. Louis County Libraries, all are notaries.
Right.
Oh,
That's a great help.
Again, we're gonna have 7 satellite locations that will be open 10 days prior to the election. So
Very good.
people can vote absentee at those locations. Obviously, when you sign the statement, you're notarizing it right there. So it's a good system, and again, we're gonna have one for every county council district. Both the August and November election.
Yep. So if you want to follow me, we're going to go next door right here.
We're talking.
So this is our tabulation room, or what we call the tab room. Every election starts and finishes. So let me say a couple things about this room. These computers in the middle you see here, this is where the elections are programmed. This is where the ballots are tabulated on these computers. These computers are completely air gapped. They never have been, they never will be connected to the internet in any way, shape, or form. And then these computers against the back wall, these are where we scan the mailed absentee ballots on these scanners. Again, these computers are also not connected to the internet in any way, shape, or form. So that air gap is really important to us. It's a key element of security. So when people talk about hacking voting machines or a voting system, I'm not going to say that every voting system is unhackable or impenetrable, but what I am saying is you have to be here to do it. You can't be in Moscow or Beijing or in your mom's basement to hack a voting machine or system. You got to be here. And so that's why we have all this security here to make that as difficult as possible. So when we start 10 weeks before the election, bipartisan team comes in, sits down this computer, and they what we call build the election. They put all the candidates into the system, all the precincts, all the polling places. They make sure all that stuff is matching up. And then they generate little USB sticks on this computer. Then we take those out into our warehouse and we load those into all the voting machines and go through a whole testing process on all the voting machines, which we'll explain out there. On election night, everything comes back to us. Those little USBs come back to us from every polling place. And in every polling place, the Democrat, Republican supervisor have to get in a car together and drive it back here or drive it back to another turn-in location, which then drives it back here under police escort, under seal. And then we break the seal, open it up, stick it in here, and then count all the votes. We don't start doing that until after all the polls have closed on election night. So how do we get the results from this computer that doesn't connect to the internet onto the internet? Well, we stop tabulating from time to time. We take a USB out of this computer. We take it over to a computer that is connected to the internet. We post the results on the internet, and then that USB runs for every update of election results we make on election day.
Oh, okay, and when in the past, when I saw these machines, I understood that there were 2 systems, that there was one that you used for getting the unofficial results on election night, and then one which was for the official canvas. Is that still just going on?
We've had this system since late 2019. It doesn't have a bifurcated structure like that.
I think, as Eric said, to get onto these machines, to build the election 10 weeks out, we have a Republican code and a Democrat code. They have to be entered at the same time. So the the R and the D can work on the computer together. Same thing on tabulation, it has to be Republican code, Democrat code to get into it. So, as Eric said, on election night, I'll go back to 2020 November, we had 221,000 votes, absentee votes, that we had opened the envelopes and we had scanned the ballots through our machines here. They don't tabulate, those machines do not tabulate, they just scan, just like the scanners at the polling places. When you put your ballot in, it scans it, it doesn't tabulate it anywhere. And the V drives out of these machines, just like the V drives at the polling places, are then brought here, and we, at 7 p.m., we're allowed then to tabulate all of the absentee results. So that's why at 7:30 p.m. on election night 2020 presidential, we reported out 221,000 votes.
I think it's good to mention also the V drives, the thumb drives, they're not generic thumb drives you buy at Best Buy. They're uniquely encrypted, military grade encryption, and they're also, the wiring's different. So if you actually took it and put it into a laptop, you wouldn't see anything, it would just be almost fuzz. Same thing, bringing it back in, a generic one into our system, it would be at the same way.
As Eric said, when we get ready to report results, we bring a thumb drive in from out that's brand new, never been used, bring it in here, plug it in, get the results downloaded, and take it out to a computer that's connected to the internet. That thumb drive never comes back into this room. The way we can ensure to the public that there's a complete wall of security.
Also, keep the paper counts.
Yes.
Figure out what's happening to you the whole time.
That's an excellent point, that yes, on election night for speed and everything's tabulated electronically, but every ballot is a paper ballot in St. Louis County. And to give you an example, we had, I can't remember which election it was now, but we had one polling place where they forgot to bring back that USB, but they brought back and then reading the results. So if as we had one time years, the drive fall off of somebody's car, then it got ran over. And so, but again, we have the paper ballots. All the ballots are on paper. And then after election day, after pretty much everybody but us stops caring, we are in here auditing and reconciling the election. We make sure the number of ballots cast at each polling place matches the number of signatures at each polling place. By state law, we take a random sampling of precincts and we hand count the ballots, make sure it matches the machine count. Then if any race is particularly close, we hand count 100% of those ballots and make sure it matches bipartisan teams. This past April election, the Parkway School District, there was a really close race. They requested a recount. We counted those ballots by hand, and I think one or two votes changed at the end of the day. So, and it was voter intent. It was because people had made errant marks on the ballot, which the machine interpreted different than a human would. But
and we had another recount, Bellary Bakers was one vote apart for one of the races that we counted it. It turned out exactly as was reported on election night. So, and the people who were involved were here to watch it.
So it is endlessly infuriating to people like us when people are talking about it's vote flipping and all this kind of stuff. I have yet to see how you flip a paper ballot. So it's like, it's hard to take. Yeah.
How close does something have to be before it triggers an automatic recount?
Well, in Missouri, there's no such thing as an automatic recount like there is in a number of states. But if a local race is within 1%, the loser can ask the circuit court for a recount, which they have to grant unless we show good cause that it shouldn't be granted. If it's a state race, somebody that declares their candidacy with the Secretary of State has to be within 0.5% to get that recount from the court.
In 2014, some of you may know, I ran for county executive and lost to Steve Stinger by 0.6%. So I asked for a recount.
I think that was the last day.
It was the last day of the time period, and the people here hated me.
Thank you.
And the results didn't change. I still lost. So,
And one last thing, you may be wondering what these monitors are up here for, other than watching the Cardinals. It's on election night. It's funny, leading up to election day, people ask, hey, Rick and Eric, have you done this right? Is this taken care of? Blah, blah, blah. On election night, nobody cares about that. They just want the results. So it's candidates and you people from the media that just want the results as fast as possible. So we have tracking on all of the bags coming back from all the polling places. So when the media calls us on election night and they say, some of the results are in, what's still out, Rick and I can look at this screen and we can say, well, there's still 3 cars from Oakville coming up the highway. They're going to be here in 20 minutes, that kind of thing. So we can see at any point where everything is and keep track of it. So if anybody goes astray, if any ballot bag stops at a tavern somewhere, we can call them right away and say, get back.
That's happened.
Oh,
Are there actual crackers in the orange bags?
Yeah.
It's a great system and it allows us to track. As you can probably ascertain now, the long pole in the tent on recording results on election night is how fast the workers get the thumb drives and the ballots back to us. Because once they get here, and we'll show you how it operates out in the warehouse here, we move it through very quickly.
Because again, it's not over the internet. People have to drive it back here from every corner of the county to get the results.
We don't want it over the internet.
And each team has a police escort too, so some of them get here pretty quick because they say, go ahead.
Go as fast as you want.
All right, if y'all want to follow Bo out and Rick out to the warehouse, we're gonna take you there next.
Oh, okay, well.
Is that it, Julie? Take the ballot.
Location of driveway might have up to 10 different drivers. 10 days, 10 drivers. And you gotta have 2 drivers to get the security location. So that car is a pretty full car. This is our warehouse.
He's coming.
It's our warehouse, and as you can see, we've got a chain link fence from the floor to the ceiling. This is the last of the 4 locations where you have to have a Republican and a Democrat going together. We have locks on the store here, a red lock and a blue lock. I'll let you figure out which one's which. But at the back door, it's a slide. These are slides. So all of our election equipment is stored in there. We have cages. You may have seen the cages. Cages contain all of the equipment that you need for election day. Control rooms, printers, scanners. All of the paraphernalia, the extension cords, the signage, the kiosks, the privacy, everything is in these cages. When they're fully loaded, they weigh about 900 pounds. If they're heavy duty, we got them have to go lab, have to plug the equipment. It worked out perfectly for us. All the necessary equipment. If we have a large election, like maybe this November, where we think the turnout's going to be high, with two of these cages in each polling place also. So, they're all marked, and our warehouse staff, 7 days prior to the election, will start to move them out to the polling locations. This is where we've made arrangements to have our equipment in the polling places ahead of time. It's a lot of work, a lot of moving parts in that process. For our polling place guys arranging the warehouse folks to get it there. All our whole badge are charging up here, the iPads, and our phones are charged up. Got anywhere between 1,400 iPads, 600-700 phones. They have to be charged and ready to go for every election. We've got electric battery operated generators. If we lose power at one of the polling places, we can take those out. Keep the machines working. We'll have tech teams out in the field throughout the day. They're responsible for maybe 4 or 5 different polling places. They can get there within 5 minutes. They correct any problem that they have. With our new equipment, we have hardly any trouble. It's very durable. Works very well. But just in case, we always plan for the worst, so that we're ready to handle any problems. A couple of years ago, Elliot Davis, he paid for it. He came and visited our place and was really impressed with how things are working. He came by the day after the election and he said, Rick, you ought to be happy we're not talking about you today. We're talking about St. Charles, and Lincoln County, and Illinois. He said, how did you manage to have an election without any problems? I said, oh, Elliot, we have problems, but we have people out in the field to take care of those problems right away, so that they don't become big problems. And people won't have to wait more than 5 minutes to get their vote. So it's a lot of trial and error over the years. We've got a great team that works here in the election board now. Top to bottom. They are thinking outside the box to try to resolve problems before they even happen. So, pretty proud.
I just add two things to that. All the equipment we have is tested prior to the election. Actually, next week we'll start testing the equipment. It's all tested with bipartisan teams for functionality and logic and accuracy. So, we don't just send stuff out without knowing if it's going to work. But like Rick said, we always have, a couple things that printer jams up on election day or something, we have replacements. The other thing I would mention, just as you look around out here, we've got a lot of stuff, as you can see. And, anybody who works full-time at the election board, whenever they're out in a social gathering, whatever, people will inevitably ask, well, what do you do the other 300 whatever days when there's not an election? This is the stuff we're doing. We send out thousands of extension cords. This is an example, thousands of extension cords to every polling place, every election. When those come back, they're all a mess. We got to roll them back up, get them in. We got to make sure all the I voted stickers are in there. We got to make sure there are enough ink pens to go out. It's all that little stuff. And it's that time between the elections when we're doing all that stuff, when we're testing the equipment. There's preventative maintenance we perform on the equipment, changing the batteries, all that kind of stuff. That happens in those, odd year months when we have a little more time between elections, and we need that time in order to prepare for the next one. There's always another election. I tell, especially if I'm talking to international audiences in the United States, we vote on everything all the time. We always have at least 3, maybe 4 elections a year in St. Louis County. So we're at it all the time. It's just that in most elections, most people are not participating in them, but we're always prepared. So.
On election day, we're here at 4 a.m. We leave after the last votes. Sometimes it's been after midnight, but usually a lot sooner. We've got this great equipment.
So can you explain, 2 questions. Can you explain the difference between good and bad ballot stock? Who decides what's good and what's bad? The other question was on the 5-day rule. Is that a county rule? Is that state of Missouri as far as like 12:01 a.m.? Is there a way to get that extended so that you're not trying to crush that in and having to do 24/7?
It's a state law.
And then the last one is federal government requires 22 months of storage. Where do you, it's obviously not here.
It is.
Oh, you got 22 months worth of ballots that are stored here too. Oh, okay. All right.
Yep. So I'll take your last question first. If you look way back in the cage, roll back. that we set up. The voter adheres better to.
Yeah, look really good on the big screen.
That's
Yeah,
good.
you did a good job.
So the person in charge of administrative elections is just an elected county clerk. So there's not like a version of Rick and I in Warren County, for instance. That being said, for things like testing the machines, duplicating the ballots, doing the recounts of the ballots, state law requires in all the counties, no matter what the clerk or election board, that has to be done by bipartisan teams. And in those counties, they bring in extra election judges of both parties to accomplish those tasks. So there is still bipartisan participation, and I don't know if oversight is the right word, but there is not a full-time bipartisan administration like we have. Yes, sir.
Bipartisan, you have Republican and Democrat. How do you know somebody's a Republican or a Democrat? Work here or co-workers? Yeah, co-workers.
Well, we pretty much take the co-workers out of the pool. I know some of the township people, both parties are trying to do some validation. That's pretty difficult to do. As I said earlier, people who work here have to declare which party they are and they have to use political references. Now they verify that they are Republican.
Can't like provide it for each other.
Whatever references they give, we can check them out. I always ask the Republican people to apply for Republican positions. Did you vote for in the 2014 county executive race? Steve Spayer or the other guy? So, most of the time they have you vote. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's not as big as
And Jackson County. That door.
Good evening and welcome, everyone. I'm Joan Berkman, president of St. Louis Press Club. Thank you for joining us for what promises to be one of our most important community service programs this year, one that focuses on understanding the role of the media in its coverage of political candidates. Tonight, you'll have a front row seat to better understand how the press functions in a democracy and why it matters that citizens get reliable information and are exposed to diverse opinions. For those of you who may not be familiar with Press Club, we are a professional, social, and charitable organization of people who make, cover, influence, and consume the news. Our mission is to raise awareness and funding for student journalism scholarships and enterprise journalism grants. These grants assist working independent journalists to spotlight marginalized stories that might not otherwise be told in our region. Our social activities and timely community service programs like this one tonight help sustain a vital media community. Also, our members benefit from professional development activities that bolster their skills in our ever-changing global communications world. Most importantly, we are a fierce advocate of freedom of the press. My thanks to Press Club's programming committee for their incredible work in planning tonight's program. A special thank you to the St. Louis County Board of Elections for being such an active partner in helping us deliver this special program to you tonight. And especially to you, the audience. Thank you for joining us. We hope this evening's program helps prepare you for our upcoming primaries and the November elections. And now, please welcome St. Louis Press Club's Vice President and Program Chair, Jessica Brown.
to know what was going on in the world. It didn't take me long to figure out that the Post gave more coverage to Democrats and the Globe to Republicans. Him afterwards, and I still have the autograph that I got from that encounter. My real first encounter with the media, though, was when I became John Ashcroft's St. Louis area coordinator in his 1974 campaign for state auditor. It was there that I met the likes of Duncan Bauman, several Pulitzers, Bob Hyland, Julius Hunter, Betsy Bruce, and others. I got to know Dick Weil of the Post-Dispatch when he traveled with the Ashcroft campaign for 2 days. It wasn't long before I realized that Fred Lendicke and Jack Flack were important political reporters, and that Jerry Berger was the guy you leaked gossip to. Back then, Republicans easily got the Globe's endorsement and had to fight hard, though, for the Post endorsement based on good government and fighting corruption issues. I also remember that over time, Republicans avoided seeking the Post endorsements, especially in the GOP primary where they thought it would hurt them. During my director of election days in St. Louis County from 1985 to 1993, I worked closely with the media to explain the voting process and was very accessible. I got to know many reporters, including many of you in this room and online, who covered state, local, and federal contests. I was a believer in transparency and thought the more they knew and reported on the process, the more trust there would be among the media and the voters of the election results and the campaign coverage. It was more than one time I went above and beyond, and occasionally I would get a late night call from a reporter asking me if I can meet them at the election board and let them see someone's campaign finance file, so they can confirm facts and get it in the morning paper or on the 10 o'clock news. I believed that it was the public's right to know, and I went overboard to try to help get that done. Perhaps the best thing I ever did, though, as election director, was to make the final results available on election night by the end of the 10 o'clock news and in time for the morning paper. And I know that some folks in this room really appreciated that when I was able to do that, and not the least is Phil Sutton, who's here tonight, when I was able to get him the results. So you can have it in the morning paper, the final results. Even though I was a Republican director, like Eric and Rick, I worked closely with my counterpart and was nonpartisan in conducting elections, making sure all political parties and candidates had access to the election board equally, and that everything we did was done in a bipartisan, nonpartisan, and transparent manner. Some of the reforms I implemented still carry on today, where it takes a Democrat and Republican to input separate passwords to get results to obtain access to rooms where ballots are counted and stored. The media liked me, and I liked them, even if I had to call them out from time to time on biased articles. I was scrutinized heavily in 1990 when Democrat Joan Kelly Horn beat Republican Congressman Jack Buechner by 52 votes using punch card ballots. And that was 10 years before 2000. But all the transparency and reforms that I made paid off, as after the recount, the results only changed by 2 votes. My career then took off internationally, where I now have worked in 41 countries promoting democracy, elections, fairness, and transparency. I even met Vladimir Putin when he and I both spoke, one after the other, to a conference of European election officials in Moscow in 2002. I worked in Ukraine, where we now see the result of Putin's evil and what happens when unchecked power and the elimination of freedom of expression and an independent media occurs in a country. From 2003 to 2007, I served on the newly created Federal Election Assistance Commission, or EAC, including a term as chairman, where my job was to implement election reform in the United States. While on the commission, we took 158 votes. 157 of those votes were unanimous, and we worked hard to do that. It was unheard of for a bipartisan commission to do that, but it was the reason I wasn't reappointed. because the White House felt I wasn't Republican enough. At the EAC, I dealt with the national media, including trying to explain why electronic voting devices could be trusted. In 2006, there was an uproar on the left over electronic voting devices, and I had to debate their trustworthiness with Lou Dobbs of CNN and did a 2-hour interview with Scott Pelley for 60 Minutes, where after airing a 15-minute segment with all kinds of questionable people questioning electronic voting, he had me on for 10 seconds, telling the world that these devices were safe and trustworthy. It was an experience that reinforced my belief that much of the media was more interested in sizzle and sensationalism than real journalism with real facts. While my dad was proud I made 60 Minutes, he wasn't happy they only gave me 10 seconds to tell my The history of journalism has always been advocacy journalism, so the bias of the media, and especially print media, was really nothing new, although the journalists presented themselves as non-biased, and indeed, most tried hard to have balanced articles, including those who I knew had strong personal biases against candidates. I now want to spend my last few minutes talking about trust in elections. Election officials today are under unprecedented attack. 70% of US election officials are elected to office, and most of them are up for election this year. We call them county clerks in Missouri, they call them county auditors in Iowa, many different names, but they do elections and they're up for election this year. Many are quitting this year, and they've said, I've had it. Personal attacks, attacks, their home, protesting in their home. I've never seen anything like this in all my years in elections, and it's scary. It really is. And yes, Donald Trump is mostly responsible for this lack of trust in our elections, especially among Republican voters. But the fact is, as I see it, Donald Trump is a product of the media, and trust in Americans' institutions were declining long before Donald Trump came on the political scene. In 2015 and 2016, having Donald Trump on a program or a news story drove ratings, clicks, and profits. And cable and the mainstream media gave Trump billions in free coverage. In 2016, Trump's 17 other GOP rivals received barely a blip in coverage compared to the massive coverage of Donald Trump. The distrust of the media by conservatives, Republicans, and rural Americans has been building for a long time, and a long time before Donald Trump came along. I saw it myself, and it would constantly be a point of discussion among Republicans. The elite New York-based national media mostly ignored those groups and their beliefs and consistently made them look bad. Fox and conservative media, and especially Donald Trump, tapped into that frustration like never before, and the strong move towards much more partisan media and the open hatred of Trump by the mainstream media just poured gasoline on that fire. Like other global, unstable, authoritarian types before him, Donald Trump fed into that frustration. And it didn't matter what lie he told, too many people believed him before they believed the media. The media gave every appearance that it was just a mouthpiece for the Democratic Party and liberal causes, especially to Republicans. And rural America and conservatives turned them off and turned to cable and other sources for information and facts. Which leads us where we are today. Today, where a House committee guided by a former ABC News executive is exposing what went on behind the scenes after the 2020 election and on and before January 6, 2021, which was one of the darkest days in American history. However, just this morning on the Today Show, they gave many more minutes to their interview with the ex-wife of Johnny Depp than to the coverage of what really happened on January 6th. Now, why did the Today Show do that? It is because just a few weeks ago, when the Ukraine crisis was at its height, studies showed that the most Americans were following what was going on with the Johnny Depp trial than what was going on in Ukraine. It's shameful. Far too often, Americans' media do not lead anymore. Instead, they find the lowest popular common denominator, i.e. clicks and views, and chase it for ratings and profits. It's shameful. And by the way, according to a Political Morning Consult poll out just this morning, 57% of Americans believe Donald Trump is responsible for the terrible events of January 6th. However, you should also know that that same poll found an equal 57% of Americans also hold the media responsible for what happened that day. That alone says a lot. I will say that locally, while talk radio has taken a decisively conservative turn, St. Louis broadcast media are rightly leading with the senseless murders that occur in St. Louis every single day. They've generally been mostly fair and balanced in covering candidates and have done a good job in having election officials like Eric and Rick on to explain the voting process and to dispel false information. Since 2018, I have served on the board of directors of Smartmatic USA, a company that was mentioned in yesterday's House hearing as one where false allegations were made against it by Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and others. Smartmatic has 1 U.S. client, Los Angeles County. Yet, the company was publicly accused of taking orders from Venezuela's Hugo Chavez to control Dominion voting systems and fix the election for Joe Biden. As one who's been very aware of Smartmatic since 2004, I was astounded by the allegations. In December of 2020, I watched in disbelief when Giuliani told a committee of Pennsylvania legislators that he had proof that, quote, just a couple of years ago, Smartmatic took the leaders of Dominion voting to Venezuela to meet with Hugo Chavez, close quote. Not one person on that committee or in that crowded room asked Giuliani how that could be possible since Hugo Chavez died in 2013. It was false statements by Giuliani and others that was promoted by Fox and other media outlets that led Smartmatic to file a $2.7 billion defamation lawsuit against Fox and those that promoted this nonsense. The company's reputation was severely damaged and people had to be held accountable. I cannot comment on this lawsuit, but needless to say, it was warranted. It does sadden me, however, for Fox News has provided a much needed outlet for conservative policy views that need to be heard, views that are often not given a voice with the legacy mainstream media. I don't know what the future holds, but I am not optimistic that the eroding trust in our institutions, including the eroding trust in our elections and democracy, will end and be restored anytime soon. We've become a polarized nation of people who don't respect others' opinions and speak past each other. Social media has put fuel on the fire, and unless we stop demonizing each other, our democracy will continue to decline. Too often, people hide behind their phones and social media to make personal attacks. I've seen it on Facebook and Twitter with relatives, friends, and neighbors. I've also seen it by retired reporters who demonize conservatives and Republicans all the time. I've seen it in my own neighborhood in Woke Webster Groves, where folks who express an alternative opinion or, God help us, a religious point of view are attacked relentlessly and demonized on Facebook and are told to avoid those kind of people at all costs. We need to be less judgmental, for as Mother Teresa used to say, if you judge people, you have no time to love them. In addition to our crisis of democracy, we have many other serious problems in this country, and in the interest of time, too many for me to mention. I know that many of us in this room and online have lived through similar crises during our years, and that the United States came through them, but not without great hardship and a tremendous local and national effort to solve these problems. So where do we go from here? We need to do everything we can to instill more trust in our elections and democracy. Students need to put the phones away and talk about civics and civility in our classrooms. We need to support our election officials and those institutions that make democracy work. Journalism needs to get back to their roots of objectivity in presenting both sides fairly. Even if we must do it one person at a time, we need to be better listeners to those that have positions different than ours and show respect when we disagree and be kind when we express our views to others. In spite of our myriad of serious problems, I can honestly say, though, that the United States of America is the greatest nation on the face of this earth. And we are still a beacon of hope, freedom, and opportunity for so many people throughout the world. On January 8th, 1985, I had the honor of leading the crowd in the Pledge of Allegiance at the inauguration of John Ashcroft and other state officials. Just a few months later, on June 14th, 1985, I had the honor and privilege of attending a celebration of Flag Day at Fort McHenry with President Ronald Reagan as a featured speaker and descendants of Francis Scott Key sitting just 2 rows in front of me. Because 9 of our 13 grandchildren live within 6 minutes of our house, we do a lot of babysitting, especially in the summer. This morning, 2 of my grandkids helped me put out flags in front of our house. One of the flags that my 13-year-old grandson put in the ground was one that I bought at Art Hill on 9/11/2011, where they had a flag flown for each American who died on 9/11/01. My flag represented Donald Ketchum, who was just 27 when he died in the World Trade Center. I put it up every year on Flag Day and on the 4th of July and on 9/11. Our flag was flown and the Star-Spangled Banner was written during some of the darkest days of this nation. Yet the American people and the American spirit prevailed, and a strong nation emerged that gave people like my grandparents, who immigrated to St. Louis from Sicily exactly 100 years ago this year. They came for the opportunity to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. When they became citizens in 1934, my grandparents pledged allegiance to our flag and for everything it stood for. I am forever grateful to them and to those who have gone before us that they helped to make this nation the land of the free and the home of the brave, like our Star-Spangled Banner says. I not only inherited my grandparents' genes, I also inherited their freedom. And I have done my best to pass on my passion for that freedom to my 13 grandchildren. And I will forever pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Oh, Paul, wonderful anecdotes, so eloquent, a wonderful way to start our program tonight. It will be a Flag Day I will not forget. Thank you. Thank you very much. Another round of applause. I'm sure all of you will agree, an active, engaged, and participatory citizenship ideally might include a better understanding of why the press is critical to our democracy. Paul talked a little bit about that. Or how news operations cover political campaigns and politicians and elections. Or what reporters' guiding principles look like. And finally, what the realities of running a news business resemble, especially today. So to take us down that road, I'm delighted to introduce our moderator for the evening, someone who embraces and enlivens civic communications, Professor Joy Leopold, a faculty member. Joy, welcome. And if you will kindly take it away and introduce our panel. And while Joy is making it up here, Sandy, you wanted to make a point.
Just a
So
little
let's do that.
housekeeping note. All of you have index cards. We have a Q&A session. And so if you have questions for Paul or any, you'll hear in just a minute, any panelists, we're asking you to write them on your index card. We have more cards. And myself and Dale Singer, retired reporter for the Post-Dispatch, we will come around and pick these up for you. All questions are going to be answered. If they're not answered here, we're going to get them answered and then posted for you, and you'll hear more about that. So if you have questions, please write them down. Take it away, Joy.
Thank you, Sandy. And thank you, Jessica, for that warm introduction. My name is Dr. Joy Leopold, and I'm honored to serve as the moderator for tonight's panel discussion. Again, the topic tonight is the media's role in fair elections. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panel from your left to right. It's going to be Mark Schlinkman, Heather Gavillo, sorry, State Senator Carla May. Okay. And then we also have Rick Stream and Eric Fay, who are the St. Louis County Board of Election Directors.
So you want them to come?
Yes,
up
please
now?
come up here. Thank you.
Where did you have yours?
So much water in here, man. I don't know. Hydrate for a while.
Ready? Okay, so before we get started, I'm just going to give a few housekeeping rules. For the first question, each panelist will have 2 minutes to respond to the initial question. When there are 30 seconds left, Sandy Diamond, who you have already been introduced to, will hold up the yellow 30 seconds left time card. Once those 2 minutes are up, you'll hear a bell, and then we will move on to the next panelist until every panelist has had the opportunity to answer the first question. After that first question, there'll be 3 more questions. I will ask, and then these questions will be, they can be answered by any one of our panelists. So just feel free to chime in with whatever you have to say or your opinion. Each of these questions will have a 10-minute time limit. And so when there's 1 minute left, Sandy will hold up a 1 minute left sign, and then the yellow 30-second sign. When those 10 minutes are up, the bell will sound and we will move on to the next question and then the next question. At 7:50 or around there, we will begin the audience Q&A. And so we're asking that all of those questions be written down on your index cards that you have in front of you. The in-person audience should write their question down on the index card. Sandy and also Dale Singer will come around and pick them up. The Zoom participants should write their questions in the chat feature on their devices if they have not previously submitted those questions. Please know that as many questions will be answered as possible, but as Sandy said, the ones that we can't get to will be answered later and posted on the St. Louis Press Club website. Okay, so let's begin. Our first question is a 2-part question. So each of you will have 2 minutes to respond, and then we will all be notified when there's 30 seconds left. The first part of the question: how and where do you get your election news? And secondly, how and where do you think other people get their election news?
I get it. And I'm covering news, so it's a little bit different than when I'm on vacation reading about it. I'm picking it up from sources, from public meetings, from other media, from Twitter, Facebook, you name it, candidates themselves, people like Paul D. Gregorio, who used to work for candidates, and other people. It's hard to summarize it. In terms of where other people get their news, it depends. It depends on the person. Some people still read print media, older people mainly, I believe, and other people, it's a mix of online and print. Other people solely online. Some people watch TV. That's what they get, where they get it. And myself, it's a big mishmash of all sorts of places.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Heather.
So where I get the media is very similar to what you said. from everywhere, really, from candidates themselves, from other media, from social media. Sometimes I will pursue it myself by looking at campaign finances and things like that. You can find a lot of election information in that way. As far as others, I think word of mouth is a big part of it, social media especially. I do think people still get their information on elections from traditional news, so newspapers and radio and television, but for the most part, I think a lot of it's going to be more of your new age social media, a lot of ads, political mailers, things like that.
Well, for me, I get most of my media from being on the ground. A lot of it comes from people, voters, actually, on election day. You know, it's you have a way of understanding the pulse of the election by being on the ground. You're talking to people, you're talking to voters, you're seeing the turnout. On election day, I get it from the election board. I like to watch the results as they come in. So I watch the election board results. I always have it up on the TV, whether it's St. Louis City, St. Louis County. That's how we get the information. But a lot of times, if you really want to know what's happening in the news, you go to the people who are actually making the news.
I think from my standpoint, I see it on TV, I read the newspapers, I go to a lot of different websites, speak to a lot of people in the legislature who are actually working on legislation to govern how elections are run here in Missouri. Also, we go to, Eric and I and our deputies go to election conferences around the state as well as around the country. We get a lot of information from those folks who are attending those conferences. We're also on Election Line, which is a nationwide reporting service about how elections are being run in different states. So I think both Eric and I get a lot of information that most people wouldn't have access to because they're not part of the election process per se. So as far as where other people get it, I think I would echo what Senator May said about people getting their news from a lot of people that they're associated with, their neighbors and friends, as well as on the ground, so to speak.
I guess for me personally, where I get my news also would be election news. Every morning I watch and read the Deutsche Welle, which is, you know, the German equivalent of the BBC. I read the hard copy of the Post-Dispatch every day. I listen to NPR on the ride into work usually. And then I try really hard. I read the Call weekly from South County, the Webster Kirkwood Times, the West News Magazine from West County, because in our positions, it's always that little stuff that's happening at some city council meeting or whatever, that some kind of blood feud in some small city that's going to blow up on election day. There's really, I will say, a dearth of my wife was from. I love following the county commission down there. But as Rick said, as election administrators, there's a website called Election Line Daily, which is an aggregator of election administration news from across the country. And I'm pretty religious about that as well. I don't know. I mean, I enjoy reading the news. I consume it every day from different places, but I don't know where regular people get the news from, because it seems like a lot of, I heard this, I heard that, but I don't know what they're actually reading or watching. You know, my parents, they listen to KMOX and they watch the local news. I don't watch any news on TV really. And my younger sisters will like tell me about something they saw on TikTok. So it's a bewilderment to somebody like me where people actually get news. So that's me.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really nice. Now let's move on to our next question. Remember, we'll just have 10 minutes to discuss each question going forward. So the second question, how do allegations of fraud affect your jobs as journalists, as election officials, or as legislators? And do you believe faith in the integrity of the electoral process has eroded? And if so, how can it be restored? No, just whoever wants to jump in. Yeah, so the question again, the first part of it, I'll read that, is how do allegations of fraud affect your jobs as journalists, as election officials, and as legislators?
I'll start. As far as from the journalism standpoint, when it's pretty simple on our end, when there's an allegation of fraud, you dive in and find out if it's true. And it's important to branch out to a lot of different places to really make sure you get the full story. And then if it is true, you take it to the people. If not, then you let it go, you let it die down. Don't fan the flames, don't create something that's not real.
I would maybe add a little bit more to that answer, which I don't disagree with. But in my relatively short time in public service, I've seen where, especially in local TV news, the reporters are constantly evolving through the local TV channels. And I think there used to be reporters that stuck around for a long time. They got to know the local government officials. And like in our case on election day, when some candidate says something like, you know, they ran out of ballots at this polling place, a reporter who'd been around long enough would know kind of how to vet that and gauge that. And now some of these folks who are just constantly churning through, they're right out of school, they don't know us, they don't know the local landscape, they'll call us right away and say, what about this one polling place run out of ballots? What are you talking about? And we'll call the polling place, we have ballots, what are you talking about? You know, so I just from my perspective, I think the kind of local government beat is really falling by the wayside. And so I think it is a little bit harder for local government officials to combat disinformation and allegations of fraud because the reporters are not as acclimated to the landscape. My own observation, I guess.
Well, the observation, you know, dealing with it from a political standpoint, when you're, you know, in the legislature and you keep hearing we have voter fraud, but there's no evidence of voter fraud. And if it's less than 0.1%, do we really have voter fraud? So I think that, you know, we have to trust the people that we have put in charge of the voting system, which I think is the election board. And the election board has the resources. And if they need more resources, give them more resources to vet and to make sure that we're getting actual voters to the polling place and voting. So I think it's I don't like micromanaging. So if we have an election board, allow the election board to do their job. And I don't like misinformation. I hate no facts. If it's not facts associated with it, why are you saying it? And so that's my pet peeve on voter fraud.
Yeah, I think the term voter fraud can encompass a lot of different things. People who are registered improperly, people who shouldn't be on the rolls, who should be on the rolls, maybe somebody voted twice. We've had several cases now that we've joined this system of consortium of states where a few people have voted twice in an election. It's investigated and dealt with by the authorities. We've had cases where here in St. Louis County where some absentee ballot issues came up with a particular person in one of the municipalities. That was turned over. You know, we can't investigate, we can't prosecute, we just run the elections. But if things come to our attention, we turn the evidence, whatever we have, over to the authorities, the FBI, to investigate. So those things are handled. It's very, very, very infrequent that these things happen. But our job is to ensure that what we do here in this office mitigate or lessens as much as possible any opportunity for somebody to do something that's not appropriate. It's illegal. So we very, very religiously try to keep our voter rolls up to date if you went on the tour with us, you understand how that works for us, looking at different lists that we get from a variety of sources to clean the rolls. But again, with 1 million people in St. Louis County, it's a little more difficult to stay on top of every single issue. When people call me and say, hey, Rick, I think something like this is going on in our county. And I said, well, where'd you get the information? They said, well, in such and such a state, they're doing that. I said, well, you have to remember, every state runs their elections differently. And here in Missouri, we run our elections this particular way. And in St. Louis County, this is what we do. And I run through the entire process, as we explained in our tour, of how the election is actually built, executed, and tabulated at the end. And when I get through, and most of those people obviously are Republicans, are calling me because they think I'll be sympathetic. And I explain it's different here in Missouri, and it's different in St. Louis County. So I think in St. Louis County, we have a very tight control over what's going on in our county. It's not to say we cover everything, but we certainly do our best to ensure that no fraud takes place. And we try to answer these questions immediately. On election day, when accusations are made about, as Eric pointed out, running out of paper here or there, or other things are happening with machines breaking down, we have teams out in the field that can get to every polling place within 5 minutes and correct any problems if there are any. And of course, with electronic media now, we're able to track if machines are breaking down at our command center here in the office. So you're welcome to come by on election day and see all of it.
Thank you so much. So what I'm hearing is that there are, some discrepancies between, whether or not election fraud is actually taking place and what people might perceive as actually happening. And so with that in mind, do you all feel that faith in the integrity of this process has eroded? And if so, how could it be restored?
I believe that the only reason faith is eroded is because of misinformation and people not willing to believe the truth. So right now in this era, which I have never seen before, people would like to believe what's untrue versus what's true, even when you put the facts in front of them. So I don't know what that is, but I think that's what erodes the trust of people, because and then the silence of other people. It's like when you're silenced when something is wrong, is not good. It's not good for us. It's not good for society. It's not good for our democracy. So I think that all of us have an obligation to support the integrity of the systems that we've put in place to offer the checks and balances, to uphold, the flag that we've created, the democracy, the leader in the world in reference to what we do in voting processes. So the only erosion I see is misinformation and the repetitive repeating of that misinformation and attacking the system because it's not going in your favor.
Okay. So I think that, piggybacking off of that, as we do work to restore the faith in this process, what do you all in your different roles here need from each other? What do journalists need from legislators, from election officials? What do election officials need from legislators and journalists, and so on and so forth to, promote and support fair elections?
Well, I could go first, I guess. Generally speaking, in terms of election officials, I've been doing this for many years, and I can say without an exception, just about every election official I've dealt with in St. Louis County, St. Louis City, St. Charles County, the state of Missouri, has been helpful and informative. Generally speaking, they do respond to questions from the media, and I wouldn't really have anything more to ask, frankly. Generally speaking, I've had only good experiences doing this for many years. I don't think it's changed at all. And it doesn't matter if in Secretary of State's office, I've dealt with several Democrats, several Republicans, some of the Missouri Secretary of State's office, and they've all been helpful in their staffs as well. So the thing that reporters and other media need is accurate and accurate information, but also access to the people that can give you the accurate information. So again, I never had a difficulty getting that. I think most reporters would stay the same, at least in terms of the Missouri election officials. If I'm forgetting about it, an exception, but I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, I know Eric and I always have an open door for the press here in our office. And many times, I think Mark, you just called me the other day about something. And so we're more than happy to answer all the questions from the press and to have them come by and see our operation. And many of them have come by to see it. We even had Elliot Davis in here for a couple of times. You paid for it, you know. And he was kind of blown away by how the operation was, how complicated and complex it was, and how well it seemed to run. He thought it ran very well. I had to convince him that we did have some problems, but we tried to correct those problems right away on election day so that they didn't go into full-blown disasters like it happens in some of the other places. You know, I don't want to speak for other states or other counties in Missouri, but I will say that the press has been very good to us. We have a communications director, Nicole Spencer, who's around here somewhere. She puts out press releases to the media to encourage them to cover different events that we're having here and different changes in election law that Senator May voted on.
Or against.
Or against. I just said voted on. I didn't say for or against. She and I served in the legislature together back a few years ago. Anyway, we try to inform the voters in St. Louis County of the changes that are coming down the pike in, for instance, the House Bill 1878, which was passed by the House and the Senate. The governor hasn't signed it yet, but if he does, then it'll go into effect toward the end of August, after the August primary. So there's some changes in there. We will inform the public of those changes, and most of the information we send out goes to the press, and we have been pleased in most cases for the press to get that information out to the public, because that's the way I think the public can feel comfortable about what's happening for the election process in their neighborhoods, in their communities, in their county. So we always have an open door. When I was in the legislature, I had a completely open door as budget vice chairman and chairman. The press could come into my office anytime. That's the way I feel about it here. And we're both very honest about what's going on in our office so that they feel comfortable asking us any type of question, hard or easy. We like to explain what's going on here.
Yeah, I would say, Mark calls us on a very regular basis, and I know those days leading into the election, the phone rings, Eric Schlenkman, how many, blah, blah. And so we try to get that information out very, very quickly to him. But I think as election officials, and to answer the question, there's no, I don't think silver bullet, but there are things maybe we can do better. And to Rick's point, where we try to be very transparent, we try to get the facts and figures out there, but we need to go past that, kind of Joe Friday, just the facts, ma'am kind of thing, and start maybe humanizing ourselves a little bit, because as election officials, we never want to be the story. If we're ever in the news or the newspaper, something bad happened to us. And I think, Pam Fessler, the retired reporter from NPR, made a great point. I interviewed her for my podcast, and she said election officials humanizing themselves and telling their story, that, it's us, but it's also out at the polling places. It's your grandmother, it's your teacher, it's your neighbor running these elections. It's not some nefarious person. And like telling their story about how this process actually works is something we probably need to work on. And we need, frankly, the media's help telling that story, that human story about how elections actually come off. I think that's one thing, but I'd also want to remind people that this isn't a uniquely American problem. As Paul mentioned, myself and Brianna Len, the Boone County clerk, we went to, of all places, Moldova last week, the country of Moldova, and we interviewed election officials there. And they're facing a lot of the same problems. They're right on Russia's doorstep, and they're combating a lot of disinformation from Russian media. And there's no silver bullet, but all we know to do is to, like Rick said, be as transparent as possible, tell our story, and have honest brokers from the media that as long as we're being open, transparent, that they'll work with us to help us tell that story, and not just voting starts at 6 a.m. and ends at 7 p.m. It's also a little more to it, that it's not some people behind a curtain pulling levers. It's real human beings following a process.
Yeah, to Eric's point about publicity, unlike Hollywood, where any publicity, including bad publicity, is good publicity, that's not the case with election officials.
I think part of it also is that people are generally distrustful of government anyways, and that's going to extend even all the way to our elections. So that's just something we have to anticipate and get access, as everyone else has said, get access to the information, to the people who know the information. And I can't stress getting the whole truth. Half truths don't do anyone any good.
Right, like the truth about that bill.
Yeah, but does the media have enough bandwidth to tell the whole truth? That's the challenge as I see it. You know, when you talk about local TV news, it's going to be a little blurb of us saying what time the polling was. Like maybe in the newspaper, maybe on public radio or something, they've got more bandwidth to really talk about something, but it's hard. I mean, I don't know how to do it. It's hard to break through on those formats where you're so constrained, like Paul said, 11 seconds on 60 minutes, you know, it's hard to get the point across.
And that's the way it is too politically. It's hard to get the point across. So we're like news medias because we have to advertise. We have to send out information to individuals, and you have to send out something where people won't just drop it in the trash. You're trying to get information, but people, sometimes they don't want it. You have to give it to them in clips.
There is a responsibility on the other end to consume a variety so that you are also getting every angle that you can.
Senator May, could you elaborate a little bit more about what specifically in your role as a legislator you might need from a journalist or an election official in particular?
Well, you know, I try to stay out of the media and do the work. I am one that, you know, I don't try to create news. I just like to do the policy work. But, you know, I do appreciate the media because I think that sometimes things happen and people need the story told, but they also need it told in a way, you know, that's truthful too. So for me, you know, I think the role that I see the media playing in the Capitol are, they're there. I'm comfortable with the fact that, you know, the Senate doesn't have where you can watch it on video like the House, which, you know, I bring this up all the time. So they think that, you know, it would erode the discussions or the decorum in which we have conversations. So I like the fact that the media is in the Senate. They're in the box. I look up there, and when they're not there, you know, in those late hours, I'll be like, something is missing, but some of them are listening. So I think we need them because we need them to, you know, actually tell the story of how these bills and these policies are getting passed and what are the discussions and the barriers to these policies and legislation going forth. When they call me, I respond. I answer truthfully. I rarely make the news because I'm just not news. I'm boring. So I'm not one that, you know, sensationalizes anything. I'm such a straight shooter. And so I think, you know, we don't make the news like that, but we need them very much so.
Okay.
Yeah. And we need politicians to answer truthfully instead of sensationalizing. I know.
Well, thank you. Okay, and so just kind of circling back to something we were talking about earlier, right? Election fraud, talk of election fraud, it's at the forefront of our minds right now. And so I just wanted to know, is there any way that we think that the three groups of people at this table can work together to figure out a way to build trust so that election results are accepted by all candidates and by the public?
Absolutely. I think that, I don't know, did anybody else want to say anything?
Start us off.
I think that all of us have a responsibility to the public. We all have constituency. So I think that we have to support each other. The media has to tell the story so that the community can know the story. But also we have to act in concert in getting the news, the information out there, whether it's politicians, whether it's the election board and the media. I think we all have a responsibility to protect the integrity of the stories. And I think it's important for people to see a consistent supporting of the integrity of the information. And you'll get it from different places with different angles, but we all should work together. That means that we need to supply, me and the legislature, I need to supply the information to the media that they're requesting, you know, and vice versa.
Yeah, I think as far as election officials, as I've said on the air too, our job is to run the elections efficiently, professionally, accurately, fairly, and in a timely manner. And we try to do that as the best we can. I tell our employees we have two customers, the voters and the taxpayers, and we're obligated to satisfy both of them. We've cut our staff down by over 25% in the last 4 or 5 years. So we're saving a lot of money for the county taxpayers, but hopefully we're providing a better product. But our job too is to get the word out. And we've talked about how we've done that, and perhaps we can do a better job. I think that the public hears more about what we're doing in this office. We answer more questions, as we answer every question that comes in either by email or by phone or in writing. But and we try to then take if somebody asks you a question by email or letter or phone, you better believe that there's probably at least 100 other people that were thinking about it. So we try to then answer that question when we put out our press releases or some of the other information we do it. We do a lot of social media from the office and get the word out on Twitter and Facebook, some of the other platforms. Again, if we can get our story out about what we're doing here and be completely transparent, which we are, I think that goes a long way toward reassuring the people of St. Louis County. Again, we can't do much for St. Charles County or any other county in Missouri or the state or the other states around us. We have to do what we can for St. Louis County. We're the largest county, 1 million people in the state of Missouri. And if we can assure the people of St. Louis County that the elections are fair and honest and professionally run, that's our job.
I guess we should probably provide our side of it. I agree that overall, we just need to be able to work together. But we also, on the media side, we have a responsibility of paying attention to how legislature and things like that respond or affects elections. For example, in Madison County, the elections were surprising in 2020. And then the legislature responded with a sub-circuit law. And now only a third of the county gets to vote for judges. By creating, they have sub-circuit 1, 2, and 3, and sub-circuit 1 gets to choose all 3 judges this year. So like in my situation, I live in a different sub-circuit, I won't vote for any judge. And there's a responsibility on the media's part to show that there's that side of it too. It's not just the argument of voter fraud and things like that. There's also, how is the legislature changing the way we vote?
Absolutely.
Also, another goal is to explain what's going on. Right now, in the last couple of weeks, I've been covering the situation in St. Louis City where the aldermanic president resigned after being indicted, and a couple aldermen left too. And so in addition to writing about that, the political fallout from it is interesting. And it's a little unclear at this moment exactly how they're going to run the election to succeed the aldermanic president. The election board in the city is studying the law, and it's very confusing. It's not spelled out clearly in some respects. I've been following that and been trying as best I can to explain it, and hopefully we'll continue to do that. So at this point, we don't know the answer exactly how they'll figure out. I mean, at some point they're going to reach a conclusion shortly on how they're going to run the election. It's not how they, I'm not explaining, right? Not how they run it, but when the election will be held specifically. So that's what I'm talking about. It's a little unclear what legally they're required, when it would be, so they have to make some choices.
Absolutely. And since you mentioned, how the elections, how the legislatures change things, that creates a problem with integrity for voters. Because when the voters do initiative petition to their government and they ask for something, and then the legislature feels like it's not in their best interest, or they feel like, they don't like the decision of the voters, they change it. And so, but the voters have to be just as engaged, because they need to change them as well, because voters are the boss of the elected people. And when your boss says this is the way it's going to be, that's the way it should be. And so we have that battle in the legislature, as when voters speak and they speak loudly, they say, well, they didn't know what they were doing. Well, it is my understanding that voters are very smart, very intelligent. Most times when voters cast their ballot, they know what they're voting for. They're sure of what they want to vote for. And so when we discount that, I think that offers a little mistrust in the voting process and voters.
And thank you all so much for offering your insight. It's been really enlightening. Right now, we're going to transition into questions from the audience. And so we're going to select some questions from those who've been submitted in person. And I think we're also going to offer some.
We're looking to see if there's chat.
Okay. So I'll just go ahead and get started. This question says, do we need, or do we even have already, national standards about how elections are run? It goes on to say, today's tour gave me a high confidence that I didn't have. And so it would be nice to know if it would be nice to have that same confidence at the national level.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's, I think, a somewhat hard question to answer, because in the United States, election administration is more decentralized than any other country in the world. And I think, there are pros and cons to that. I think in the United States, we certainly forego efficiency and standardization. But as a trade-off, we pick up responsiveness of local officials. Now, I think Rick and I really appreciate the fact that we have the autonomy here under the direction of our board to do things in St. Louis County that fit St. Louis County. We've done some innovative things, vote anywhere. We've kind of cut our staff back. We've implemented a number of reforms here in St. Louis County. If things were very standardized from a state or even federal level, I don't know that we would have that flexibility, and I certainly wouldn't like that. But I will say it does make it very hard for the public and the media to cover election administration issues, because people are often conflating things from different states that are not the case, state to state. So, Paul DeGregorio, who gave the keynote tonight, he was instrumental in the Help America Vote Act and the implementation of that, which did set some minimal standards for voting equipment and things like that. But I think as those situations arise, it's good to address those. But I hesitate to say there should be, one kind of standard way to administer elections across the country, because we are such a diverse nation. Just from where I sit, I don't know that I would favor that, but I don't know you.
Yeah, I agree with that last statement. And even in Missouri, as we said on the tour, there's 116 counties or election authorities counting the city. 6 of those have bipartisan election boards. The rest of them are elected county clerks who have election administration as just one of their functions, of many functions. So they don't have the staff or the money that we do in St. Louis County to do the things that we've done here. So it's more difficult for them to to be on top of everything, and who knows what's going on in the other states. So if they cloned Eric and me to go around the country, maybe things would be better. Who knows?
Mostly we just want the state legislature and the Secretary of State to leave us alone. Let's do our job. That's
That brings me to a point, I don't do this every year, but I used to cover the legislature many years ago, back in the 70s and 80s. And anyway, since then, one of my habits at the end of each legislative session is to look through what I call the election Christmas tree bills, in which all sorts of disparate, how would I describe it? Changes in law are thrown together, some very minor, some very major, and some get no publicity during the legislative session. They're thrown in until Paul would be familiar with this, and Eric and Rick as well, and Senator May certainly. And all sorts of things pop up in those. And some years there's nothing particularly interesting in these bills. Other years there are. And so you just have to keep track of things and watch them carefully. Usually the election officials are well aware of them.
Yeah, that's when a 2-page bill goes to 100 pages.
Mhm. Yeah, an omnibus bill becomes an ominous bill.
Yeah. Right, and you have to read it very quickly because your time is very short in reading it. Because it comes on the floor that morning at 10 a.m. They're trying to pass it right then, and you have, thank God for my speed reading teachers.
Okay. So here's a question that just asks, what is it going to take to eliminate or reduce divisiveness?
I got one. Love. We have to start loving each other again. Looking at people as people. I really think that, I don't know, this is crazy. It came out of left field. I'm sorry. But, people are people. And I think that we have dehumanized individuals and we have picked up systems and processes and forgot about the people and the people that our policies affect. So I think that we have to start thinking about we, the people of the United States, form a more perfect union. We have to start thinking about, the flag became united. We became united. And so I think in our individualism, we forget that we're united. We forget that point. And so I think that's lost. And I think that if we want to stop divisiveness, stop attacking people, and I have to say this though, media plays a role because, especially in politics, the people that attack with the evil, attacking each other personally, gets more attention than someone that's just focusing on the policy and, the things that they're going to do to impact, voters and constituents. So we have to watch that, because if we support the negative and we give the negative, the most voice or the loudest, we'll have negative all the time.
Yeah, I think if we treat everybody with respect and dignity, even though we may disagree 100% on policy or political issues, but we respect their opinion and just agree to disagree respectfully.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I'll just say we're in a unique place. Rick and I were in an office that's bipartisan. So he's a Republican, I'm a Democrat, but we have to work together every day. And I think what Rick said, we respect each other. We don't agree on everything, but we know we have a job to do and we have to make it work. And we have to set an example for the employees that work here as well, that the Republicans have to work with the Democrats and vice versa. Now, that means we can't, we can give each other trouble from time to time. I love it when something comes up here in the office and Rick will say, oh man, why is it like this? And I said, Rick, you voted for that in the legislature, but but I
didn't read the bill.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, I think people just have to remember they have to work together and frankly, have a little fun, laugh a little bit. I mean, I think in the state legislature, Senator, I hope you would agree. I mean, I think prior to term limits, there was more collegiality perhaps, and people spent some more time outside of the chamber together. And I don't know what role the media has in all that, but it's, there need to be some friendships, and, I've come to know Rick in this job, and it's been a nice thing getting to know him and being able to work together. But I don't know what the answer is, but that's what we do here. We can only control what we do here.
That's right.
Ourselves.
And I would echo what Eric says. I mean, both of us have been involved in politics on the ground. For me, it's been twice as long as him because I'm twice as old. He's the same age as my son. But, I campaigned with my mother for Dwight Eisenhower in 1956 in Kirkwood, where I grew up and still live. And I've been involved in politics all of my life. So I'm as Republican as they come. But in this job, I have to be a Republican, obviously, and he has to be a Democrat. And by the way, I think he voted and he worked for that Stanger guy against me. So that's about as hardcore as it gets. No, but here we are working together. I mean, and we have our two deputies the four of us work extremely well together, but it takes effort. And I think that's back to what you were saying too about working together, loving everybody, treating people with respect and dignity. We both agree that we need to run this office very professionally and morally and ethically and legally correct. So we do that. We may not agree on every little thing that we do, but we come to a consensus, the two of us and the four of us, to get the job done. And that's our goal here. And we think that our job is to provide excellent election service for the voters of St. Louis County and to help do it at a frugal cost to the taxpayers.
I guess I just had one more thing real quick. What I've seen there's the rare election official across the country that goes into this business with the intention of advantaging their party over the opposing party. And that's where we run into problems. We've seen that in some places across the country. And at the election office at the state or local level, that is not the place for the election to be won or lost. It's out on the campaign field. And that's what worries me a little bit. And maybe back to the question about standardization, election officials should be held accountable by the media to operate in an objective and frankly nonpartisan way when they're doing their job. And that's what Rick and I try to do. And that's what, if you're a member of the media, you should be asking those type of questions of election officials. That are they there to do work? Are they there to pontificate and try to advantage their party over somebody else? And if that's the case, then there will be problems.
And when you're talking about that too, we're talking about the collaboration of individuals who are representing different voices. And so that's what you have in the Senate, that's what you have in the House. And so people are representing different voices. It's really not, what your opinion is how you receive the voice of this part of the state or the voice of that part of the state. And you have to say, I represent this piece, but it's not the dominant piece. We have to make sure that the policies are balanced in their effect on all the voices. That's the key. And some people, have temper tantrums because they want, the whole pie when they are actually not the entire pie. So that's when you have the divisiveness that comes in. So sometimes, we have to realize that we all represent the entire state. And so we represent different voices. So we have to have collegiate. And contrary to popular belief, a higher percentage of the bills that are passed are bipartisan. Mm-hmm. It's just those few hot button topics that people like to grandstand in the media about, life and choice. I remember when I first got elected, I said, I'm not talking to one without the other. Both of y'all come in my office or we don't talk at all. Because I think that if we're solving a problem, we have to collaborate to solve the problem. And if we're just going to keep on, separating and getting the meeting, we'll never solve the problem. So let's put the problem to bed.
To kind of go on that, I think there's a responsibility for all three parties. There's a responsibility for the people to don't click on those clickbait stories. I can't speak on behalf of mainstream media because we are a much smaller media outlet where I'm from. But if you don't want to hear more that, then stop consuming that and start broadening where you consume your media. Start reading more reliable or watching more reliable media. There's also a responsibility on the media's part to not provide a lot of that stuff. Make sure, for starters, make sure it's true. Above all else, make sure it's true. But then make sure you're telling the whole story and make sure that you're telling all the stories that there are to be told, not just the one hot topic. A lot of times that's important because those might be the things that affect the people the most. And so like with the subcircuits, I really have focused a lot on that, but it really affects the people. But making sure that we cover all the bases. And then there's also that responsibility on the legislature side of it, where we are not their pawn. They can't just give us, they have to understand that we are there to tell the truth to the people. We're not there to tell whatever their side of it is, or don't give a very leaning one way or the other press release and think that that's a sufficient source of information. And a lot of times, sometimes it feels that way, that they think, or not just legislature, but you might have like the local county government or the local school board. It could be anything, but they're going to try to get the media to tell just their story. So it's, in order to get rid of the divisiveness, we need to all own up to our responsibility, I think.
Thank you. That's very insightful. So this last question that we have was actually posed for Paul DeGregorio. So I want to invite you to answer as well, but also open it up to everybody else. What do you all think of this potential change, which is to make Facebook liable for the effects of its algorithm, which promotes extreme and high emotion social media content?
Oh, you get the easy question.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's time for us to leave.
Yeah, right.
That's a tough question, because, there's freedom of expression.
Hey, Paul, you want to stand right here? Because so that way you're on the, see there.
Or you can, there's a chair in the middle.
Or you could sit.
Okay, all right.
You should have for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's all a freedom of expression issues, but Facebook has been so problematic. And really part of the reason why, at least I think, we have such division in the country, because what people put on there and how they argue on there. But I don't know, about holding people liable. The algorithms, though, if they're pointing people to more negativity, that's not a good thing. And maybe they need to be held accountable for that, because it should be a platform where everything is equal and you're not driving people in a certain direction just so they can make more profits and more clicks and more advertising. Because it's become this public medium that people use to convey their opinions, but really to keep in touch with people. At least that's what I use it for. So I don't know, it's a tough thing. I don't like to curtail speech. I really don't like to ever see that happen in our country. But as I said earlier about, the Smartmatic lawsuit against Fox, sometimes somebody has to be held accountable for just telling defamatory falsehoods that damage, in this case, a product. But in other cases, damage people's personal reputations.
Thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in?
Well, I think education on how to prevent them from driving you to specific media is like, so I think in your settings, you don't give them access to certain things, because I say no to everything. No to my content, no to my contacts, no to this. So I think, I don't know if that will help, but educating people on how to avoid being manipulated might help.
I'd like to piggyback off you made a great point about manipulated. I think it's important for the public to understand. I typically see it in mainstream media, I would say, but word choice also. And you're going to see this in social media. The media is not allowed to tell you, not supposed to tell you how to feel about something. Or if there's a group of people, they're not allowed to say that they were chaotic. You have to determine that they were chaotic. So you find those types of words when you're reading news and opinions on social media, maybe find somewhere else to read it, or at least understand that they're trying to tell you what to think about it. And if you're aware, that might, I think, will help tremendously. A more informed public.
Yeah, similar point. I mean, basically the difference between news media and social media is basically news media is independent and isn't tied to either side of an argument. It's not supposed to be, at least we try our best not to be. And when I'm writing about something, I'm trying to describe what's going on, and I try to verify. And that's the difference. I think a lot of people just get on social media and just start talking and without verifying, and people read it and take it as truth, or at least it's something they think is halfway the truth. And when journalists write about things and we research things, we make an effort, or best good faith effort, best effort to try to find out what really happened and describe things and go to public records and talk to lots of different people with different opinions of things, not just take what the first person says. That's the biggest difference, I think.
So maybe then the answer is to have Mark Schlinkman on TikTok doing like, the board of aldermen has 28 people on it. I don't know. It's going down to 14 next year.
Okay, thank you all so much for that wonderful discussion and conversation. I really appreciate it. Do you have any questions from Zoom? Or did we know? Okay. So I.
So I want to comment on the excellent moderation of this panel of 3 different institutions here. So you learned about the codes and conventions, a few of them this evening, perhaps to elicit more trust. And so I want to get more applause for this distinguished and hardworking set of participants. We didn't get to all the questions that you submitted, both through Zoom and here. However, I want all of you to watch for an email from the St. Louis Press Club, letting you know all the questions with answers will be posted on our website. So I also can't leave here without thanks to our programming committee, Joan Berkman, Dan Scott, Dale Singer, Betsy Taylor, Margaret Gillerman, and with special thanks to Sandy for all the work you've done here. It's going, and we're forever grateful. And to our excellent, hardworking staff, Laura Schnarr and Wanda Partlow, thank you. And to John. And this partnership with the fine folks here at the St. Louis County Elections Board. You are such a warm and welcoming board with a fantastic staff to match. May we do it again, okay?
Tomorrow.
Final words, please stay connected with the St. Louis Press Club at stlouispressclub.org. Please support local media and please vote. Happy Flag Day and thank you for being here.
Thank you.